Hi everyone, welcome to the Tea with My Bookshelf. Our guest today actually needs no introduction. Author Omar Shahid Hamid has written numerous award-winning bestsellers. His books are raw and unapologetic, and being in law enforcement has given him a unique insight into the grim realities of urban life, crime, corruption, and radicalization. So let's meet the man behind the books and have some tea with him. Omar, thank you so much for coming and speaking with us.
My pleasure. Good to see you guys again.
So let's start from the beginning. Like when I look at you, you seem very mature and even keel. Was that you as a child as well?
No, it's not me even today.
Okay.
It's a very, very well-crafted image.
Okay.
It's not
you
me.
fooled us all.
I did.
So from like your childhood, can you tell us the journey of like how you became a cop?
I remember I was one of those people who had no clue what they wanted to do. Some kids know very early on exactly what they want to do. They can tell you in like class 8 that they want to become investment bankers. Mm-hmm. That was never me. I sort of spent my school years in this confusion and spent most of my university years in the same sort of confusion. But as I kind of went along, I kept figuring out the stuff that I didn't want to do. So, I got stuck in an internship one year in the accounts section of a bank, and I decided that's definitely not what I want to do. Okay. The police was again something that I was not totally unfamiliar with because both my parents had been civil servants. But I tended to view the police with the same sort of cliches that most people perhaps view them under, mm-hmm. as being kind of corrupt and not particularly helpful, and the last people you want to turn to. And I think my switch occurred soon after my father's murder, because initially when he was murdered because of political circumstances, the case and the investigation didn't go very far. But about a year after that, when there was a change in government, the same sort of police officers who had been derided by everyone, including myself, as being sort of, incompetent and lazy and not really able to do anything in a very professional manner, were able to very quickly and in a very professional manner arrest the culprits or the main culprit in my father's murder. And for me, the takeaway that I had from that was that, in a place like Pakistan where institutions are generally weak, individuals matter more. Mm-hmm. So that potential was what got me thinking about the police being potentially a very interesting career.
So from law enforcement to writing, that's another kind of vast journey. So how did that come about?
Yeah, and I suppose it's vaster because of the fact that I was never someone who, I was never one of those kids who did creative writing or won essay competitions or anything like that. Mm-hmm. So I had no kind of link to writing, and it's something that I just stumbled upon. Yes, I read a lot.
Okay, so as a child you read a lot? Yeah.
Okay. I read a lot. I read extensively. I read across formats. Mm-hmm. I read all sorts of stuff. But I never saw myself as a writer. Mm-hmm. And in fact, I started writing at a time when, which was a low point in my career, mm-hmm. in the police. And it started off as a sort of a cathartic instinct, mm-hmm. To sort of lay out my frustrations on paper or on screen.
Frustrations with the way things were being run, or the kind of people
with
you were
the
meeting?
Sort of, with my frustrations with my career at the time. Mm-hmm. And that just snowballed into what ultimately became my first book, The Prisoner. Mm-hmm. And once I'd started on that journey, mm-hmm. I found that degree of catharsis was something that I needed. In fact, now it's almost necessary for me to perhaps balance out a lot of the stresses and pressures that I face in my professional life to keep writing. So it's become almost an addiction now.
Okay. And also, do you think it's also a coping mechanism for the kind of the dark realities that, you know, like someone like me or, you know, the average person doesn't get to witness? So, I mean, the mind has to process it in some way.
Yeah, it's interesting that you call it a coping mechanism. I've never thought of it in those terms, but I think what is there is that I've always felt that there are these, you know, a lot of the things that we come across our professional lives as police officers are far, far stranger than fiction. And, you know, frankly, if I were to tell you, you wouldn't believe me. You know, it would be so beyond the realm of belief.
Wow.
And I felt that it was just a very interesting process to kind of take some of those stories, write them up, or rather use those stories as a base to create new stories, just to, I suppose, give a reader an insight, and a very limited insight, but nonetheless an insight into this very kind of fantastic sort of world.
And grim world.
Which, you know, you can call it the underworld or perhaps some of the sort of grim realities of life, especially over here in Karachi. But yeah, it just, you know, in a way, I suppose you could say it is a coping mechanism, but more it's a kind of translation mechanism, trying to translate and articulate some of those things for a wider audience.
And do you make a concerted effort to scale back on the horrors to make it more palatable for a wider audience?
I don't think I scale back the horrors, but I think, as I said, I think a lot of stories that I leave out, which are things that have actually sort of happened, or I've come across, or colleagues have come across, are so fantastical that I think any editor or publisher would have a hard time. They'd sort of throw my manuscript out the door and say, this is just not believable. So I think the first aim is to try and get make it believable enough to get published.
Okay. You had mentioned earlier that you were kind of an avid reader as a child. Can you tell us a bit about like the authors and the books that you read growing up?
Yeah, I read really geeky stuff. You know, I didn't like stuff like Enid Blyton and all. I hated that stuff. I remember getting hooked on...
That's really upset me, but sure, you can...
I just, you know, I didn't get the point of...
the enchanted wood, you didn't get the point.
I didn't get the point of that. Or, you know, like the famous five. My take was, what are these kids doing, running around old German munitions or whatever. I got the sort of thing that I really vividly remember reading as a, you know, probably starting at the age of 6 or 7, and going upwards, was there used to be this fantastic Ladybird classics, sort of small 50-page books or booklets rather, on various either historical figures or historical events. So I remember reading, the first one I read was like, I think Sir Francis Drake, and I thought it was the coolest thing to be a pirate.
Okay.
So, you know, so it was that sort of stuff. I read a lot of that, and I think it inculcated in me a great love of history, which I have to this day. I mean, most of the stuff that I read is somehow or the other related to history.
Okay, excellent. And like, again, coming back to what you were saying, that, you know, you kind of have a very unique insight into the underbelly of a lot of urban cities. How do you manage to get a good sleep at night, knowing that these kind of people, you know, exist and they're out there? And does that kind of instill a constant fear in you, or are you just immune to it?
You know, being a police officer is one of those jobs, I suppose, like being a doctor, where you see such a lot that you have to develop some sort of compartmentalization mechanism.
Yeah.
You have to, like they say about doctors, that they've got to desensitize themselves to the pain of their patients. It's a lot like that, because otherwise, if you were constantly thinking about these things, I don't think anyone would be able to. I mean, you're talking about getting through the night. I don't think anyone would be able to get through the day.
No.
But I think you've just got to be very, very surgical and at times dispassionate. But I guess the trick is, not becoming so dispassionate that you become remote to anyone who's sort of coming to you for help.
Yeah.
So it's a balancing act.
And have you come across people or colleagues who are not able to compartmentalize and it's kind of affected their mental health issues? And do you guys in general, do you think mental health is an important aspect of, how you cope?
Generally speaking, traditionally in Pakistan, we've always had a very kind of sort of chauvinistic attitude towards mental health, right? In the sense that we don't want to acknowledge it as a problem.
Yeah.
And I think as over the course of my career, when I kind of look at a lot of my colleagues, it's patently obvious that a lot of us do suffer from some form or other of post-traumatic stress disorder. The pressure of the job obviously gets to a lot of people. Like, if you look at things like the instance of diabetes or stress-related illnesses amongst police officers of all ranks, it's really eye-opening. So I think these are things that are there. We should, I think, talk a lot more about them.
Yeah.
Culturally, we haven't done that as a society. It's not to say that it's something that the police doesn't do, but it's something that we don't do generally as a society. But I think there is a lot of that, and I think there are a lot of people who in the police probably do have severe issues coping with what they've seen and what they've come across.
Okay. And kind of leading from that, it is difficult for a man. I mean, I know it's difficult for women to kind of operate in a patriarchal society. I know it's difficult for men as well. So how do you growing up, how do you not get touched by this concept of toxic masculinity? How do you balance that?
Personally, I had very strong female role models. My mother was not only a working woman all her life, but she did the whole, she was a working woman, she was a mother, she not just a working woman, but a civil servant, someone who was very much at the forefront of things. My grandmother, my maternal grandmother, again, perhaps stronger in a more subtle way than my mother, but someone who, considering her generation, she was a swimming champion. Going back to the 30s or something.
That's amazing.
In
those days, I mean, that was not very
right?
common.
So in that sense, but the issue, of course, is, as you say, it is there is a sort of not element, I'd say, but there's an overwhelming toxic masculinity overall in our culture, in our kind of emanating from every pore of our society. And I think it becomes, as you grow up, it becomes very difficult for young boys to not imbibe some of that, however inadvertently.
Okay, so speaking of patriarchy, I'm going to put you on the spot a bit.
Sure.
Why does the police in general have such a hands-off approach to incidents of domestic violence? Like, why do people always say, oh, the police came and they said, ye to gharelu masla hai and hum nahi involve ho rahe? Like, why? I mean, isn't the law enforcement supposed to A, enforce the law, and 2, protect? And why are we not able to do that for women over here?
It's a couple of issues. Yes, of course, I think for the longest time, domestic violence was seen, or rather not particularly seen, as a crime by many police officers. Perhaps you would still perhaps get the sort of response, especially at a police station level or at the level of sort of the lower ranks, where if a woman was, say, slapped or beaten up by her husband, the attitude of a lot of the first responders would be, well, it's par for the course, or she deserved it, or something like that. The other issue is also that I think generally in terms of society, we tend to, because again, we don't, as a society, and I've always said this, that the police is only reflective of the society that it works in, right? And in fact, the police usually mirrors that society pretty accurately. So if it's a society that's amoral, it's more than likely that the police is going to be amoral about things. And in our societal approach, when you have cases like this, often the first instinct is for people to say, let's kind of, bring the parties together and let's sort of tone down the situation and let's do what we call in our police lingo, mukmuka. Okay. The sort of husband's family or the wife's family sits down. In many cases, the wife's family will also pressure the woman as a victim to say, let bygones be bygones. It was a one-off incident. How
which
far
it never is.
Which statistics tell you that it never is. It's usually a repeat problem. On top of that, I think the other big, I would say, sort of disincentive for any woman who wants to sort of speak up is that if I, as a woman, speak up and say, no, I want to, I'm going to register this case. I don't care if he's my husband. I don't care if my family doesn't accept me. I don't care if I get divorced on the back of this. The state's apparatus for kind of helping out that woman is limited, right? So where you don't, we had this, I remember a couple of years ago, we had this debate about, okay, if someone comes up like this, you cannot, obviously the woman is the complainant, she's the victim, not the criminal. So you're not going to keep her in a police station. No. So what is the sort of wider support mechanism? Where are the sort of, women's protection homes or shelters or those sorts of things? Because without that infrastructure, if that woman at the end of the day kind of works out her options and says, yeah, okay, I can do this, I can pursue this case, but at the end of it, after 6 months or 8 months, I have to go, likelihood is I'm going to have to go back to either my parents' house where they will force me to go back to my husband, or I have to go back to my husband. All of this will be held against me. So, many times what you do find is that after an initial sort of outburst of the victim being very, very determined to push through with the case, when these unfortunate realities sink in, she herself backs down and says, as long as he kind of gives an affidavit that he won't do this again. So it's not just a policing issue.
It's a societal
issue, and it's not just about improving the quality of investigation, which I admit has to be improved in these sorts of cases, but it's about also creating this sort of supportive infrastructure around. And it's, we're talking about domestic violence against women, but it's the same with things like child abuse as well, right? Same sort of issues that, okay, if you have a child who sort of comes up, where will that child go? Will the child go? There's no sort of social services structure.
Absolutely.
The likelihood is if the child is put in some kind of foster home,
things might get worse.
Things will be actually get worse. So it's these sorts of things that we've got to develop these structures alongside
the reality.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. So let's speak a little bit about your books. Let's talk about The Fix. Okay. I always found The Fix interesting because it's so different, like you tried something very different.
Yeah.
Are you glad that you I'm assuming it was a bit of an experiment, or did you always want to write about cricket?
No, it was, I was always interested in writing about cricket. I think the experiment bit was inverting the whole issue and making women cricketers the heart of that story.
Which was super cool.
And I had a lot of fun doing that. As a writer, I believe that you shouldn't keep trying to do the same thing. You should keep trying to challenge yourself. I wanted to learn how to write strong female characters. I wanted to sort of try and figure out, get into the heads of these characters and try and work out what they would do, what they would feel in the situations that they were put in. So yeah, I had a great time writing the fix.
Okay, great. So speaking of cricket, India, Pakistan, that was
Great.
Yeah. And what is the future of peace between India and Pakistan, in your opinion?
Well, the answer, if I want to sell more copies of Betrayal, is that those prospects aren't good. Realistically, I think again, I think certainly in the short term or medium term, those prospects aren't super great. Because I don't think there's any sort of particular appetite on either side to push for any kind of détente. So, and until you have that, and I think what the other thing that's happened, and cricket is a part of it, is I think one of the things that was very good over the last perhaps 20, 30 years was that irrespective of whatever relations existed at a governmental level, the personal contact between people from both countries went a long way in sort of demystifying
I agree.
each to the other. And a big part of that was books, for instance. When the Indian publishing industry was booming, one of the biggest prize catches for them was Pakistani authors writing about all sorts of stuff. And a lot of Pakistani authors benefited from that. And I think it was beneficial overall as well, because the Pakistani point of view was put across and came across to an Indian audience as well.
And on that note, let's do some rapid fire.
Great.
I will be kind, I promise.
Sure.
Okay. Favorite childhood book?
Ladybird classics, Sir Francis Drake.
Okay.
Or as I say, How to Be a Pirate.
Okay. The Prisoner or Betrayal?
Betrayal, because it's the new book and I've got to sell copies.
Okay, fair enough. What is the strangest thing you have ever eaten?
Strangest thing I've ever eaten? Frogs.
Did you like it?
It tasted like chicken that had gone off.
Oh my God, okay.
Also, I think something that I tasted relatively recently, strange but tasty, nalli wali biryani, where you kind of scoop out the sort of marrow, and it melts on top of the biryani. So again, strange. Perhaps not as strange as frogs, but strange.
That's pretty strange. Okay. If you were invisible for a day, what would you do?
That's easy. I would put my feet up on a couch and just chill.
I thought you were going to say arrest the bad guys, but okay, that's
Absolutely
good too.
not, because if I was invisible for a day, that would mean that my wife couldn't see where I was. I could just chill and do absolutely nothing.
Okay. Favorite singer or band?
Changes over the years. I think when I was a teenager, I fancied myself a Bryan Adams fan.
Okay.
And in my sort of dotage, I fancied myself an Ed Sheeran fan. So
you're like romantically inclined.
I was going to say both are losers, but yeah, we'll go with your version.
Oh, well, let's go with mine.
Yeah.
What advice would you give Imran Khan? He's getting a lot of flack these days.
Go back in time to 1982 and allow Javed Miandad to get that 300 in a match against India. You see, you thought it'd be about politics, right? I've always viewed Imran Khan through the prism of his cricketing career, and I'm less interested with his
political career. Okay. Flying or road tripping?
Road tripping. I mean, the amount of PCR tests you have to get for flying, it's crazy. Road tripping.
It's crazy. Yeah. If you could change one thing about yourself, what would it be?
Eat less Doritos.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Why do you eat so many Doritos?
Why doesn't everyone eat that many Doritos?
Okay. All right. On that note, thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you. It's great being here.
I know, it was great. To all you guys, please read Umar's new book, Betrayal. It's excellent. It's available online and in bookstores. And with that, thank you so much for tuning in. Bye.